Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Sisto Says. Design 2147, New York City Code and Zoning Company. I'm here today with Daniel Cohen of Stantec. Thank you for coming in, Daniel.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Today's a very interesting show. Daniel's here to talk to us a little bit about private developers who are going to make upgrades and access points to the New York City transit system, which is a incredibly fun topic because it's something really creative and it started in the zoning resolution. But first of all, Daniel, tell us a little bit about how you got into this, how you made it to Stantec, and what this is all about, because it sounds really interesting.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Daniel Cohen. I'm a PE licensed in New York. I'm actually a structural engineer by background. I went to Lehigh University undergraduate. And then while I was at Stantec, actually, right out of school, I got my master's at NYU Poly.
There you go.
So I've been here 12 years. I'm a principal at the firm now in New York City.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I lead the transit-oriented development group, as we call it, within our structural department in New York City.
Yeah, so I believe that we worked on a project together on 44th Drive in Long Island City. Mm-hmm. And just for the audience to know, there's certain provisions in the zoning resolution. So if you want to talk about that allows, some of them are mandatory and some of them are, voluntary. So
Yes.
tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure.
And how it works, because I think it's a really creative topic.
Yeah. I mean, there's a number of reasons why a developer would reach out to us. One of the more common ones that's been in the zoning resolution for a few decades now is the mandatory off-street stair relocation of a subway stair. So if you're in one of the major districts within the city, you're over 5,000 square feet, and you're directly adjacent to an existing subway stair. The goal of the city is to get more more capacity on the sidewalks, getting those entrances off the sidewalk and into the building. And then what you have is a little asterisk in the zoning resolution that says if the station's not accessible, the developer is obligated to provide that same accessibility between the two levels that they're providing the stair for.
Oh, wow.
So that's what happened at 44th Drive. It was a stair moving into the property. Station's not accessible. That particular platform wasn't accessible. And so now you can take a stair or an elevator within the property down to that station.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
But I believe that based on that section, there's other sections that says, hey, if you want to do this, we could give you a bonus and we can partner up with the developer and give them some more FAR if they choose to do some of these programs.
Exactly.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, even, since the 80s, there's been a handful of projects, seriously, like 10 total, by special permit, where you have to go through a ULURP
process.
Right, exactly. And so the city, partnering with the MTA in 2021, introduced this new section of the zoning resolution that, number one...
That's pretty recent.
It's very recent, yeah. I mean, there's only been a handful that have so far gone through this process, and some sort of got grandfathered into it as they were making their plans. 2021 came around, and they had to meet the requirements of this section. But there's a couple things that it does, and I think it's pretty interesting for the city. The first one is that if you're within 50 feet of a publicly accessible portion of any station within the city.
And that's 50 feet on your zoning lot?
Within your zoning lot, and again, publicly accessible portion, so it can't be like a back of house area of a station or something that
It's to the platform.
public. It's got to be near the public or a mezzanine or something like that. It obligates the developer of that zoning lot to at least first approach the MTA to check to see if they need a transit easement from you. Right, so that's the first piece. You're not obligated to build anything, but you're required, if they need one, to identify an area within the property.
So that they could stake it and have a say.
And in the future, potentially use that space and build access to the subway.
I mean, the easement locks them in.
Yeah, the easement locks them in. The developer can use that space temporarily until the MTA comes and takes possession of it.
Right.
And we can get into that in a little bit because that has its own complexity.
I'm sure.
But the other half of this is if you're within certain zoned areas. So don't quote me on this exactly, but for example, if you're an R10 lot,
a high district,
a high density district, you can either fit out that easement space with the improvements themselves and pursue a bonus.
And actually build it.
Actually build
And
the
get a
improvements
bonus.
and get a bonus for it up to 20% or 200,000 square feet.
Wow,
And you
that's
can
a lot.
That's a lot. And you can do it through an authorization rather than a special permit. So this is a
Big
sort of a
difference.
streamlined
Sure, because you're not
part of-
waiting for the special permit.
Exactly. And it, historically had been very expensive and time consuming to pursue the special permit. And that's why
Just another cost.
One Vanderbilt is our most recent example of, a larger scale development that needs a lot of capital to go after,
Sure.
something like that.
Not everybody can do it.
Not everybody can do it. And so this sort of streamlines it, encourages more developments in different locations around the city to go after such a bonus.
It gives them an incentive to do the bonus.
Exactly. And then there's the on-site component of that or the off-site, right? So if you're off-site, you don't have direct access to the subway. You can look in most districts, a 500-foot radius from your
So
property.
it could be a couple of blocks away.
Could be a couple blocks away. In central business districts, so for example, Midtown or downtown Brooklyn, you could be within 1,500 feet. So it might make multiple stations eligible. It allows the MTA to sort of triage.
Sounds like sounds really good. So you're gonna probably tell me that it's not always so pro, but it really sounds. One of the things I was just at a Biz Now seminar, and we were talking about affordable housing, and one of the biggest things that I got out of that seminar was the government partnering with private developers. It really is the way New York City was built, because there was always incentives. And this sounds like a great way for the transit authority to partner up with private developers. And it's not just their zoning lot. It can go and reach out beyond, but fit the needs of the community, and that's what they need. So
Exactly.
it really sounds like a great program.
It's TOD in New York City is extremely unique. I mean, there's other markets where TOD is a big buzzword, and it usually relates to more like a regional rail station, parking garages, things where the municipality has to engage with the private side. But in New York, they're inherently tied together. And
Yeah,
so
that's great.
you've got 470 something odd stations. Anywhere in New York, you're probably within 200 feet of a subway somewhere.
And
So
especially when you get to downtown Brooklyn and Midtown Manhattan,
Exactly.
and downtown Manhattan, there's always something
exactly.
going on.
And then on the flip side of that, the MTA has a budget in their current capital program. I think it's $5 billion or so for accessibility upgrades at 77 stations, but that leaves
that's-
another 250.
Right, and that's been taking a long time, and I know there's a lot of buzz about that. We're reading a lot about it because there's a lot of stations that have them, and then there's a lot that don't. So
Exactly.
they got some work to do. Still.
Exactly. And you mentioned housing and unfortunately with 421A lapsing, what I'm hearing from my clients was the power of those two things combined, the transit zoning and the 421A.
It had to be tremendous.
It slowed things down a little bit, and the developers are repositioning now from what I'm hearing. But I think we would have seen a lot more transit investment already had 421A not
Of
lapsed.
course,
It's
because,
driving a lot of this.
Because just to stay on that point, and we talk about it's almost we talk about 421A ad nausea because
yeah.
as the banks spoke at the seminar, as the affordable developers spoke at the seminar, without incentives, it's just too expensive. It's just the land is too expensive here. The interest rates have gone up. And without the government partnering up, the developers are taking their money and they're going elsewhere. I mean, I'm sure Stantec is in Philly right now. They're probably all over the East Coast in a major city because a lot of developers were here and they're saying, hey, look, if there's no incentive, we can't make the numbers work. And until that program or some other kind of program comes out, I know the city just announced another program that they're going to be looking into, but they take, as other guests have said, it's government. It takes time. You just don't come up with an idea. It's got to go through the state. It's got to go through, all different channels. And that takes time. And when it lapsed, we're already almost 15 months into it.
Yep.
And there's proposals out there, but they may not be ratified for another year or two.
Yeah, we saw developers pump the brakes, and then unfortunately it kills, or hopefully just postpones, but low-income housing,
Sure,
and the zone and the transit investment, and so that's where the two things are tied together, because these developments don't necessarily pencil if you don't have at least the housing component, but then you get the 20% on top,
Right.
and you can make this work. You're putting all that money in the ground.
And so it just, if you think about it, if they could max out at the R10 at 200,000, if 20% of that is affordable housing, that's 40,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Plus a new train station,
Exactly.
a new entrance point,
Elevators.
a new
And
elevator,
that's the big priority on the MTA
and
stuff.
modern, and the right angles, and the right riser to tread ratio,
Exactly.
and the right lighting, and all of those things are now became modern, and so it's an incredible idea, because it gave you housing, it gave the developer a reason to build it, and they got a great access point, which for them, if it's in their building, you know, who doesn't want to live next to a brand new location to get in the subway?
It's
where
huge
you,
in New
Where
York.
you walk down, you come out of your elevator and you walk down.
Exactly.
Or you could go in an elevator straight down. It's even
Access to transit is the number one thing in the city when you're choosing a place to live, and then the accessibility piece. I mean,
That's
I have a
huge.
2-year-old daughter now. You know, I've always been sensitive to this topic, but even just pushing a stroller around New York, right? And you're trying to transfer from one train to the next. It takes you, twice, 3 times, 4 times as long to get around.
It is so funny that you bring that up, because Michael from Why Not You Media, who's producing the show today, we went for lunch and we're walking down, and we're right here on Nassau Avenue, and we're walking down, and here comes this young dad pushing a stroller. And of course, it's in Greenpoint. There's one step to get into the store, and he's got the door open. So I'm holding the door, and he turns around and he goes, "Oh, thank you so much." And a simple 6-inch riser caused this poor gentleman so much.
Yeah.
And so I could just imagine pushing the stroller around New York City, going from one side of the subway to the other.
Yeah.
It's a big to do, because there's miles and miles of platforms that
Exactly.
It's not just small little pieces. We're
No,
talking-
and it's everything. I mean, and I'm passionate about this. I live here. I live on the Upper West Side. I work in Midtown.
Sure.
I'm using the subway 2-3 times a day. I took the subway to get out here.
Right.
Right. And I see
I like
it.
the way you said that, out here to Greenpoint,
Yeah,
like we're a mile out there.
from Midtown, a couple trains that I had to transfer on, and you become, you develop this passion for it, to see. I mean, every station's different. The costs to put in an elevator are significant. Not everyone in the public understands this, and why the zoning change was so important. Developers may look at it one way, but from the public standpoint, if you try to dig a hole in the ground in New York City outside of a public property, you're going to hit 10 utilities before you get 3 feet down.
Anytime you watch them and you say to yourself, there's somebody marking every single thing that's down there, it is truly amazing. And one of the other guests on the show, Tim DeMeo, he does monitoring from Viber analysis. And a lot of the podcasts talked about how tough the TA is with their tunnels, about monitoring to dig a hole, even though it's 200 feet away, 190 feet. That's a long way. But yet they have, drill a rod, put epoxy, put this on, have a man there, have a person, not a man, a person there, monitoring day in and day out while they're doing the work. Could you just imagine, okay, well, we just want to make a new stair going down. That
It's
sounds
incredibly challenging.
So as a structural engineer, it's challenging enough to hold it up.
Yeah.
Now we got to get and design it without relocating millions of dollars worth of water line, sewer line, gas line, this line,
And those
telephone
impacts
line.
that you're making downstream, down the street to all those
Of
buildings,
course, and all the people in the community.
and then typically if you're opening the street, you're dealing with the DEP. Their sewers can be 100 years old. DOT, traffic patterns to and from the bridge. I mean, every aspect of this gets expensive, and then I haven't even gotten into the architecture, the MEP.
Right.
If you're trying to meet a building code which governs subway work, and you're applying that to a structure that's 100 years old that was never
Not
intended
easy.
to follow today's codes.
Not easy.
You know, you're talking about all these fire life safety features that you have to add in as part of the work. And so if you're a private developer, and this is where there's a little bit of friction between the public and the private, but I think we're positioning ourselves here at Stantec to be that bridge. I mean,
Right.
we're analyzing the zoning. We're developing a strategy with the developer to approach the MTA and come to something that works for everybody.
Correct.
And it starts from the moment even before they acquire the property, but the moment from there.
Sure, because it's a big part of the project.
Yes.
You know, the minute, it's funny when we bid a lot of new buildings. One of the things that always comes up is, are you going to do the TA filing? And
Yeah.
we go, no. The structural engineer has.
Yeah.
They want to talk to a structural engineer.
Yep.
They want to talk to Daniel Cohen.
Yeah.
Hey Daniel, what are you doing? Oh, we're doing this, this, and this. Okay, well we've done this. Well, we know Stantec. We've done this with you before. What are you doing about it? As code consultants and zoning consultants and expediters, that's not really our thing. Our thing is to help with the process, but it's not really to answer the specific question. So, the TA is they do a really great job because they got a lot going on.
They have a lot of assets that
They
they have to
got a
manage.
lot of assets and and they're moving people. One of the things that we pride ourselves on the podcast is about public safety, right? So, not only are you gonna partner up with them, but now you got to get in their tunnel. You got to get into City Street. You got to build this while people are walking around and the city's still moving. Didn't go, oh, well, by the way, Daniel wants to put a new access point, stop everything, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure those are big challenges for
It's
your
all
firm.
part of the approach. It's all part of how we strategize. Me in particular, I'm working with the developers, but we do have a whole team that are working directly for the MTA,
Sure.
that are working for contractors on design build. So we see the big picture at Stantec. The private side is how do you find your way into that giant machine,
Right.
to work out an agreement with the MTA and the city at large.
Well, I'm sure the biggest question that comes up to you is, so Daniel, what's my ROI on this new?
That's the only thing
That's the $1 million question.
It's the only thing
And
that
you can't-
matters to developers.
I mean, and I'm sure there's, I'm sure there's not many developers that go, well, I think it's just a good idea. I'll spend, $30 million and put this access point in.
Listen, the developers are interested in that, but they can't
100%.
build anything if it doesn't pencil. And,
Exactly.
And so, that's the biggest thing that we see. I mean, I see two big mistakes. I mean, I'll just sort of plug.
We don't want to call them mistakes.
Mistakes
We'll
in general
say
for-
they're
for-
opinions of Daniel.
They're my opinions, but I see two big mistakes from developers who are coming to terms with how they're going to deal with the MTA piece. And that's the first thing is just not having a cohesive strategy when
Right.
you're going
Going
into
into it.
And I can explain why it's a mistake. I mean, that's number one, at least, in that the MTA has $4 billion, $5 billion to spend in their capital program. They have plans at probably every station in
Sure.
one way or another. And you have to understand what they're working on and what their goals are before
Right,
you
it's
approach
not
them.
carte blanche because you decided this is what you want to do, and then what they're doing doesn't count. It's only about what I want to build.
Exactly.
Right.
And then the second piece, I mean, we've seen projects that we haven't been involved on, not understanding how much these things cost, as we just talked about, right? And so you enter into an agreement with the MTA. The MTA is interested in getting something built. They don't
Sure.
necessarily, they're not as worried about your ROI as
Of course.
if you're the developer. And so you have to make sure you're aligned completely internally on cost, on scope, on everything. And so that's what we've sort of built up over the last few years is it's from that initial phone call with the developer of what's your project to what
Daniel,
are you exposed to?
I think that is such a great point because I think that even on our side, when developers come to us and they say, hey, we're going to look at this site, we have to have a permit in 3 months. We're like, that's great. That's what you want. But your drawings won't be ready for 2 months. So you're going to leave us 30 days to get through the entire New York City DEP and TA and everything.
Resetting expectations is part of the job.
So I think that, when you read something in the text that says, hey, if you put this access point in, you're going to get 20% more, up to 200,000 square feet, depending on the size of your building. Oh my God, this is a home run. So the preconceived notion is, oh, But there is so much behind that.
Yeah.
You know, just like you said, just a couple of things. You can understand that their expectation, and part of your job is to guide them through that expectation and
Yeah.
say, look, this is the reality. We're experts at this. We know what they're going to want.
And sometimes it's talking ourselves out of a potentially good project because the reality is it doesn't make sense for your development. And so
and that's part of your job.
that's part of my job is to say, look, from day one, you're going to understand what your exposure is here, what the potential benefits are, but let's set the reality here. And so there have been a number of developers that have come. We've reviewed it, gone through a little study, and then have decided at the end of the day it doesn't make sense for your project.
So let me ask you a question. We always talk about incentives. So there's an incentive side from the zoning, which is incredible. But one of the things that another guest talked about was how does the TA, besides agreeing with city planning to put this text in there, how do they help the developer to make it even more incentivized?
Yeah.
Because if they're going to build it, if they had to do it on their own, well, they're taking it from this pocket and they're going to build it.
Yep.
Now they have another pocket.
Yes.
So now this person, the developer, puts a little bit. If they can put a little bit, they could probably get more done.
Yeah.
So, anything like that on the horizon?
There's a number of questions that developers will ask. I think everybody sort of thinks the same way. There's no secondary market for transit bonuses. That would be a huge thing.
Right. That was my point.
That would be a major benefit, that if you could build more than you really need, sell it on a secondary market to another development. That's not possible. You do need to assign the authorization from city planning has to be assigned to a specific zoning lot. So it's not like inclusionary housing where there's a secondary market for it. That would be a big thing to look at. I don't know if there's any plans at the city level.
That there is a great incentive for that zoning lot, right?
Yes.
But yet there's a better incentive if the TA could work it, because then it would be great for business for Stantec. That's not the reason I'm doing it, but I think that communities can thrive from that, right? Because they need those upgrades, but the TA can't build them all.
And it's very hard. 500 feet or 1,500 foot applicability radius is a big area, but it still is very difficult to sometimes match the project's needs to the station's needs exactly, where it will make sense.
Because each station has its own programs.
They're always unique. And then the other problem with this in general is building an elevator in Midtown Manhattan costs the same as it does in Brooklyn, as it does in Queens, as it does in the Bronx. So you have to make sure these numbers make sense for that development. And if you want to encourage more in the outer boroughs, the MTA and the city are still sort of working through what those valuations are. One thing that we're talking to a lot of different developers about are sort of outside the box scenarios where you maybe partner with another development, because we've had a lot of developers who maybe could go for a 14,000 square foot. I use that number because it's come up a few times. 14,000 square foot for doing an elevator, and that doesn't make much sense when an elevator costs $15 million right off the bat. So, like I said, that's secondary market partnerships. How do you apply it to smaller lots to continue to get that investment from the private side? Because unfortunately, when those developers walk away, you are leaving millions and millions on the table of private investment.
A perfect example of that, right, Daniel, is they remove the 421A.
Yeah.
And then they, meaning the development world, they react automatically and go, okay, well, if I pencil it out and my bank and my estimators are saying this doesn't work, they're not going to build it.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens in this particular situation. Yeah, this is great. You want to give me this bonus, but if you're telling me it cost me $30 million to get an extra 14,000 square feet, it may not make sense.
Exactly. And then the last part of your question, I mean, what can the TA do? What can the city do? I think they've done a good job of making the process better for developers. It's gotten faster from the time I've started doing this until now.
That's great.
They've set up
streamlined.
They've streamlined it. They have a group now that within the TA that they call External Partnership Program. It used to just be called Outside Projects, and so anyone that had to put foundation plans in, SOE plans for their
Right.
development. It was going to outside projects.
Correct. That's what
they've
I
split
knew.
that into 3
Oh,
categories.
cool. That's a great idea.
And they've gotten much better at responding to developers and, sort of managing this, like I said before, this giant machine within New York City Transit. You've got 25 plus user groups that all have to opine on your plans. That's never going to be perfect.
No.
And I don't necessarily.
don't expect it to
I
be.
don't expect it to be. But they've, to their credit, have gotten better at it. And so for the developer side, it's the timing, right? It's the
Yes.
downtime when they're working through their design and you're submitting to the MTA. You can get feedback quickly and continue to move forward.
Right.
That's a big incentive for them. Not necessarily monetary or anything else, but
Streamlining comes up a lot, in a lot of the podcasts that it's they want to, developers want things to go properly. They want it to be by the law. They accept the laws that are created. But a lot of them feel that there's not enough people processing the information and it takes way too long.
Yeah.
So as we get towards the back end of the podcast, Daniel, it's customary that I put all the guests on a final question. And I quote the same person, Andrew Peters from Curry and Brown, always talks about he's in the estimating world and he looks in the mirror and they're always looking in the rear view mirror and looking about how much that elevator cost last time we did it. But his job is to project. If you went to him and said, hey, we want to put this elevator and this stair in at this point on this block, how much is it going to cost? And his job is to determine that if you get the permit today, in 3.5 years from now, when you're ready to build it, that's what it's going to cost.
Yeah.
So where do you see this program, in the future? Because the best part about it is when I get to ask this question, I get you to come back.
Yeah.
And I like that because I think this is an incredible topic. I think it's incredible information for me, and I'm in the business. I can only imagine the audience. Where do you see this program, growing organically, getting bigger and better, and finding a place? So what's your guess of a year from now?
So I'll preface it by saying there's only been 2 bonus authorizations so far in this program, right, since 2021. 421A lapsing was a big part of that. I think there were more that were coming. But what I see for this program is I see this program being successful based on where I'm sitting. And, I think developers are getting smarter about how to strategize over this, right? I'm getting more calls.
To take advantage of it.
Take advantage of it. I'm getting more calls from head of acquisitions rather than head of development, right? It used to be historically we'd get a call after the project's already underway.
Now they're digging into it before they purchase.
Now we're getting it earlier, baking it into the underwriting of the project. And so I see more of these bonus authorization projects coming through based on the new zoning for accessibility.
That's awesome.
We're really excited about it. That's why I was excited to come on here and talk about it.
That's great.
Not a lot of people know about it. I think the developers are getting, like I said, they're getting smarter. Land use attorneys are getting smarter. We've been doing this at Stantec for 3 decades now. And so we've been positioned for it. We just happen to be in the right place at the right time.
I think the whole conversation's been excellent, and I'm excited that I now know about it and even though I was on a project that we worked together on, my design and Stantec did the job on 44th Drive. To me, I didn't understand the back end of it. I just knew that, hey, we have this on our site. We have to do something with it. So I figured, I didn't realize that there was bonuses, there was this, there was that. So to me, and I'm on LinkedIn all the time, and never really got a lot of traction or articles about it, and I think this is fabulous. I just want to thank you for taking the time out to come in.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And I can't wait to have you back.
Yeah, appreciate it, Sisto. Thank you.
Thank you so
Very
much.
nice meeting you.
It was great.